They refused to acknowledge that she was a captain, and as a result, they caused themselves to lose everything. The automatic doors opened. The lobby was calm and contemporary, and as soon as she went inside, she was greeted by the surge of chilly air conditioning. The kind of setting where you could tell the seats were supposed to be stared at rather than sat in, sleek and a touch too immaculate in appearance at the same time. Captain Janelle Bryant adjusted the strap of her leather bag and walked toward the reception desk, her sneakers barely making a sound on the polished floor. It was her day off, but today wasn't about work. She was here for a scheduled meeting with the airline's executive board discussing a long overdue diversity initiative. She approached the desk where a young woman in a navy blazer sat typing away on a keyboard, nails clicking in quick succession. Janelle gave a polite nod, placing her airline ID on the counter. "Hi, I'm here for a meeting with the receptionist." Didn't even glance up. "Employees and visitors need to wait outside." Janelle blinked. "I am an employee. I'm Captain Janelle Bryant, and I have a pilot's enter through the restricted access side." The woman interrupted, still not looking up. "This area is for executives and staff." For a second, Janelle thought she had misheard. She was staff. She was more than staff. She was a senior captain, with over a decade of flight experience. She let out a slow breath. "I know where the pilot entrance is, but I'm here as a guest for a meeting." She tapped her airline ID. "You can check the list. It should be under Bryant." The receptionist finally looked up, giving Janelle a once-over a FL. Before Janelle could react, she felt a familiar weight sink in her chest. This movement attracted her eye, and two pilots, both white and dressed similarly in casual wear, walked in behind her. One of them remarked, "Hey, good morning," with a smile on his face. The receptionist's face brightened up. "Captain Reynolds and Captain Harris, you are free to enter at this time." She did not even bother to check their identities before allowing them to pass through. Things Ellen's paperwork, something cold slid down her spine. She had been renting this house out after falling behind on her mortgage years ago. She was supposed to buy it back once she got back on her feet, but she never checked the details of her agreement, and now a terrifying thought crept into her mind. Had she somehow lost ownership of her own home? But the real shock was yet to come. Ellen felt her throat tighten. The heat from the summer sun was nothing compared to the burning sensation creeping up her neck. This was impossible. It had to be. She forced a laugh, short, clipped, brittle. "There's been some sort of mix-up. I know. This house, I used to own it." Daniel crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. Used to. Ellen opened her mouth, but had no answer. Officer Brooks exchanged a glance with Wilkins before turning back to Ellen. "Mrs. Whitaker, do you have any paperwork proving your ownership?" Ellen's heart pounded. She had lived here for over a decade. She had to still own it, right? She whipped out her phone, fingers trembling as she logged into her emails, searching through old documents. The silence stretched between them as she scrolled. A knot formed in her stomach. Finally, she found it. The rental agreement. Her lease. Not a mortgage, not a deed, a lease agreement. Signed 2 years ago, expiring in 3 months. Her breath hitched. This was a mistake. It had to be. Handshaking, she scrolled further, clicking through old messages from the investment company she had sold the house to when she was in financial trouble. She had planned to buy it back. It was always meant to be temporary. But then she saw it, the email. She had ignored the one titled "Final Sale Confirmation 116 Clearview Drive." Her fingers went numb. She clicked on an, scanning the words, but they blurred together. The company had sold the house, her house, and the buyer, Daniel Harris. The breath rushed out of her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't his rental. This wasn't a mistake. He wasn't squatting. He was her landlord. Ellen's knees nearly buckled. The phone slipped slightly from her grip. Before she caught it, her hands shook so violently she had to steady herself. Against the porch railing, she wasn't the owner, she was the tenant, and she had been trying to evict her own landlord. Wilkins and Brooks must have caught the change in her expression, because Wilkins cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitaker, are you all right?" Ellen blinked rapidly, her lips parting, but no words came out. Daniel, meanwhile, was watching her with something unreadable in his expression. Not gloating, not smug, just watching. Finally he spoke. "You figured it out, didn't you?" Ellen's mouth was dry. She barely nodded. Daniel exhaled. "I bought this house legally, paid cash. The company that sold it to me, your investment company, the one you signed an agreement with." Ellen's stomach twisted painfully. He knew. How long had he known? Had he been waiting for this moment? Officer Brooks let out a small breath through her nose, shifting her weight slightly. "Well," she said, "finally, I think it's safe to say there's no trespassing issue here." Wilkins, looking suddenly uncomfortable, nodded. "Yeah, this is a civil matter now, not a police one." Ellen barely heard them. The words buzzed around her, meaningless. She had spent years looking down on renters, always prided herself on being a homeowner in a respectable neighborhood, and now she was at the mercy of the very man she had just tried to have removed, her landlord. But Daniel wasn't done yet. Ellen's legs felt like lead as she stood there, gripping her phone like a lifeline. The weight of the truth settled heavily on her chest, pressing down harder with each passing second. She had called the police on the man who owned her house. She had tried to kick out her own landlord. Wilkins and Brooks exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Wilkins, eager to be done with this, adjusted his belt and turned to Daniel. "Well, Mr. Harris, since there's no actual crime here, I think we're done. Sorry for the trouble." Daniel gave a slow nod. "Appreciate that, officer." Brooks, however, lingered for just a moment longer. Her sharp gaze flickered from Ellen to Daniel, as if silently acknowledging something neither of them wanted to say out loud. Then she gave a small nod and followed Wilkins back to the patrol car. The second the cruiser pulled away, silence settled over the street. For the first time, Ellen truly looked at Daniel, not as an intruder, not as someone who didn't belong, but as the man who now held control over her future. Her mouth felt dry. I didn't know." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "No, you didn't." Ellen swallowed hard. "I thought." She stopped herself. What had she thought? That he was squatting, that he wasn't the kind of person who could afford a home in this neighborhood, that she still had power here. Daniel let out a breath, shaking his head. "You didn't even check your own paperwork before calling the cops on me. You just assumed." Ellen flinched. It sounded so much worse when he said it out loud. She could feel her world shrinking, the security she had once felt in this. When Janelle turned around to watch them leave down the corridor, she turned back while maintaining a steady voice. "I just saw you let them in without checking anything," she said. "Why am I being asked to wait outside?" The receptionist smiled, tightening her lips. "They've been here before I recognized them." With a quick exhalation, Janelle, "I've worked for this airline for 11 years." The receptionist hesitated, but before she could say anything, a uniformed security guard approached. He was broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable. "Is there a problem?" he asked, looking directly at Janelle. She could feel it, the way the air in the room changed, the way people in the lobby were suddenly paying attention, but pretending not to. The security guard's presence wasn't a question, it was a warning. "No problem at all." Janelle set her jaw. "I'm just trying to go to my meeting, ma'am." I'm sorry for the inconvenience. The guard said if you don't have the right clearance, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to walk away, to let it go, but she was tired of letting it go. She locked eyes with the receptionist, checked the list. The woman hesitated, then sighed dramatically before typing something into her computer. A beat passed, another, then just like that her face shifted, eyes widening slightly. Janelle could see at the moment. The receptionist realized she had made a mistake. She cleared her throat. "Oh, I see you here." Janelle waited. "You can go," and no apology, no acknowledgement, just a begrudging admission that she had been telling the truth all along. Janelle held her gaze for a moment longer, then grabbed her ID off the counter and walked through the doors without another word. But something inside her had shifted. She had spent years dealing with moments like this. Longer going to let this slip, because that's what it has always been, letting things slide. Letting people assume, letting them question, letting them doubt her, while she proved herself over and over again. But today was different. She had proof: the front desk security footage, the flight logs showing how few black women captains the airline actually employed, the reports from other pilots who had quietly shared their own experiences with her. This wasn't just about her. She opened her email and pulled up the draft she had been working on for months, a formal complaint outlining systemic discrimination within the airline, names, dates, incidents. She had previously hesitated because she was uncertain of the consequences, but she did not hesitate any longer. Her finger hovered over the send button, and then she pressed it. Later that night, she sat in her apartment and scrolled through the responses. Some of the responses were quick automated acknowledgments, while others were immediate attempts to dismiss her concerns. "Although we take every complaint seriously, we are sorry that you feel this way. If you would like to discuss this in private." They were not taking her seriously. She was staring at the emails with her jaw tightening. They believed that this would simply evaporate, and that she would walk away like so many others before her. She grabbed up her phone and made a call. If they did not listen to her behind closed doors, she would make sure that the world heard her instead, and once the world was watching, they would no longer be able to ignore it. Therefore, it is time to bring this to the public's attention. Janelle's phone was constantly vibrating with messages, emails, and missed calls. By the time she woke up the following morning, her tale was published in every newspaper and magazine. There was a journalist from a large aviation news outlet who had picked it up, and the headline was completely straightforward and did not pull any punches. Black female pilot denied entry at her own airline's office, told to wait outside while white colleagues walked, and she hadn't even had time to process the impact before her inbox exploded. Other pilots, some still employed, some long gone, started reaching out. "This happened to me too. I was pushed out after I complained. I have proof. Where can I send it?" And then the stories from the passengers started pouring in. I remember feeling relieved when I saw a white pilot taking over from a black one. "I hate that I thought that way." I watched a flight attendant question a black pilot once while letting her white co-pilot through without a word. It made me sick. Janelle sat back, phone in hand, pulse pounding. She had known the airline had issues, but she hadn't expected the flood of whistleblowers, former employees, even customers adding their voices. And just like that, the airline's carefully curated image of diversity and progress started cracking. By midday, the airline had released its first statement: "We are conducting an internal review regarding recent allegations. We remain committed to diversity, inclusion, and fairness." It was weak, generic, the kind of statement that meant nothing, and it didn't work. The pressure didn't ease, it built. Stockholders started asking questions, passengers demanded refunds, flight crews refused to remain silent, and then an investigative report was released in one of the most prominent newspapers in the country. The article had discrimination complaints, wage inequities between white and black pilots, and a pattern of internal retaliation against personnel who spoke up. After reading every word, Janelle realized that she had lived it, and now everyone else saw it as well. The executives, who had dismissed her with such ease, were now scrambling to repair the damage. As the week came to a close, she received a phone call from Captain Bryant, an extremely anxious human resources representative. "We would be delighted to have a talk with you, and we value your point of view." Janelle was on the verge of laughing when she stated, "Now you'll listen in court, because this isn't just a public relations problem anymore. This is about to become a legal disaster. However, you had the opportunity to listen before she made her statement. The airline made an effort to fight back, and their legal team was frantically trying to come up with carefully worded comments about mistakes and isolated incidences that they brought in diversity. All of the consultants made public commitments and even flashed photographs of their one black CEO at every available moment. However, none of it was successful because litigation had already been filed. Janelle was not the only plaintiff. Other former pilots, flight attendants, and ground crew members also came forward with their own receipts, wage differences, promotions, and concerns that were denied, brushed under the rug, and eventually dealt the final blow. A leaked internal email, a message sent between two senior executives mocking the backlash, let her scream into the void, "This will blow over like it always does." It didn't. The email went viral. News anchors dissected every word. Social media erupted. Stock prices tanked. Corporate sponsors pulled out. Passengers canceled flights. And then one morning, the CEO, the same man who had ignored Janelle's complaints for years, resigned effective immediately. But it was too late. The airline reputation was already in freefall. One by one, investors started cutting ties. The company's board tried to restructure, but the damage was too deep. Months later, the inevitable happened. A headline that sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Major U.S. airline files for bankruptcy amid discrimination scandal. The company that had once dismissed Janelle tried to silence her, erase her, was now gone. But she wasn't done yet. She hadn't fought for this just to watch another airline repeat the same mistakes she had. Bitter plans. The front of the conference was where Janelle was standing. Hall took a deep breath and smiled as she scanned the room. The faces that were looking back at her were not just black, they were also Latina, Asian, and indigenous men and women of all ages. Some of them had just graduated from flight school, and their eyes were filled with hope. Others had been working in the industry for years, and they bore the same battle scars that she had. I had spent years believing that if I just kept my head down, worked twice as hard, and proved myself over and over again, things would change. She allowed the words to settle before continuing, but I had to learn the hard way that silence does not fix broken systems, and that when one of us speaks up, we encourage others to do the same. This wasn't simply a speech, it was the launch of something bigger. With the money from the lawsuit settlement and the backing of other pilots, there was a murmur of agreement that seemed to spread through the gathering. A real program that provided scholarships, mentorships, and legal protection for underrepresented pilots, one that held airlines accountable, and one that ensured that no black pilot would ever have to fight to be seen as worthy again. Janelle had co-founded an aviation diversity initiative. This initiative was not a public relations stunt, nor was it a corporate checklist. She looked out at the crowd, which was filled with faces filled with determination, hope, and power. She said that we had changed the industry, and we were just getting started. The applause was deafening, and for the first time in a very long time, Janelle felt something that she had not allowed herself to believe in before. It was not just justice, but there was real lasting change. How many times have you witnessed injustice and thought that it is just the way things are, that it is what they count on, that we will let it go, that we will move on? But when we speak up, when we demand better, we force change. If you have ever been in Janelle's shoes or seen something wrong and remained silent, this is a reminder that your voice matters, and you should not let anyone tell you otherwise.